Hi, my name's Janet, and I'm going to be going over the Fruginas Hawk Survey Protocol Plan for 2018. The objective for these surveys is to survey for Fruginas hawk nests evenly across the province in order to track population trends and also potentially changes in population range as well too. As you're getting ready for your surveys, then this is a checklist of materials that you're going to need. You're going to need either a tablet or a smartphone that has Survey 123 already installed. So keep an eye out also for the webinar that's for Survey 123 that shows you how to fill out the data, how to use it, and how to fill out the data for it. You've been provided with a survey map, so please bring a paper copy of that with you out into the field. You're also going to need a highlighter, a marker, a set of binoculars, a field guide or identification app, whatever your preference is, a spotting scope, in addition to a window mount or a tripod, and then also potentially backup data sheets as well too. As you're planning your surveys, certainly keep an eye out on what the weather conditions are like, because safety first. We don't want people surveying out in inclement conditions, including snowstorms, or when it's raining heavily, or even if it's medium to heavy rain. As you're keeping an eye out for those weather windows to do your surveys, definitely be mindful of what the weather's been like the previous few days or few weeks as well too, because certainly if it's been raining heavily for the past few days or weeks, then that's going to affect road conditions, and they might be slick and could be dangerous. Hawk surveys can be conducted when it's low to high winds, because wind doesn't obscure your ability to look and find nests. But the caveat to that, unfortunately, is that it can be really hard to identify birds in nests with a spotting scope or binoculars when it's windy. So these are some things to keep in mind about weather conditions when you're planning your hawk surveys. Some of the species that we're going to be recording in 2018 include Fruginas hawk, Canada goose, great horned owl, red-tailed hawk, Swainson's hawk, common raven, and American crow. We're not going to be recording magpie nests. As you're out surveying, some of these nests can happen on either trees, or they can be found on trees, artificial nest platforms. Fruginas hawks and some other species will also nest on man-made structures, including old windmills, oil and gas infrastructure, and transmission towers, and even power poles too. Fruginas hawks and some other species will nest on cliffs. That includes river and creek banks, and also hoodoos. And there are occasionally ground nests as well, depending on where you are. And Fruginas hawks, and some other species too, are pretty infamous of nesting on anything that's elevated off of the ground with a flat top. So if you do find a Fruginas hawk nesting on a different nest structure, please make note of it in the comment section. As you find nests, then you're going to be looking for different evidence of activities, or different evidences of activity. This includes seeing an adult in the nest, whether it's a hawk or an owl that's actually in the nest, standing, sitting, or low in incubation position. You might see an adult entering or leaving the nest, and because it's early spring as well too, it wouldn't be unusual to see nest building behavior such as hawks carrying nesting materials, or seeing fresh sticks incorporated into a nest. You may also observe courtship feeding and copulation in the spring as well too. One of the things that we do use for evidence of activity for Fruginas hawks is observing an adult within 15 meters of a large stick nest, because it may be early enough that there may not necessarily be a bird in the nest incubating or laying, but they might be nearby being territorial or taking a rest from nest building. As you're getting ready for surveys, you want to plan your route ahead of time. There's a couple of reasons for this, and it includes strongly to reduce observer bias. And it's going to be important to also be able to adapt your route as well too, because in the spring some of those road conditions might end up poorer than you anticipated, and you might have to change your route. As you're looking at your survey map, then try to avoid those highways and any busy roads as well too for safety. And it's important to plan your route ahead of time and not just drive towards trees or any of the good spots that you know of, in order to reduce any kind of bias. And as you're looking at your map as well too, try not to survey beside large water bodies, and that includes things like lakes, lakes, reservoirs, and rivers. As you're planning your route, then keep in mind that we don't want people trespassing, and that it's also okay that if a survey is interrupted as well too. So if you get called away, or the weather turns poor and you need to leave for the day, that's just fine. You can send the information for just that day, and then start a new survey form in your app to record data when you return back to the survey on another day. So as you're planning your route ahead of time, you want to plan your route through as many different land cover types as possible. So here in this township, there is some grassland and maybe some tame grass as well too. So you can see it's more evenly colored versus cropland that often has more blockier chunks from machine tiller being tilled by machines. So you want your survey route through this township to go through both grassland and cropland. And so here's where you're going to start, and this observer planned his route to go through this grassland, and then the remainder of his route goes through cropland. And as you are planning out your route too, you want to be mindful of these different land cover types, but also how far you're going as well too, because routes should be about 20 to 30 kilometers long, with a minimum of 20 kilometers per block and up to 30 kilometers each. As you're planning your route, just because it's the nature of how the roads are laid out, you might have to double back driving on a road to get to the road you want to be driving on. And as you're calculating distance, then don't include doubling back. One of the things that I like to do when I'm planning out 30 kilometers in each township is to count out the number of sections as I plan my route. So I have my highlighter in hand and I count out a route that goes past 19 sections. So you can actually count out the squares on the map to plan your distance. So make sure you have a plan to be able to keep track of your distance, so whether or not that's using your odometer or measuring from your survey map after the fact. Driving on these surveys is done relatively slowly. We ask people to drive between 30 to 50 kilometers an hour as safely as possible, and be very cautious of other vehicles, farming equipment, and people. As you're driving, make sure to use a marker or a pen and draw arrows on your map to show your route, because your planned route that's done in highlighter may not be the exact same as the route that you actually end up driving for many different reasons. So here's an example of a township map. So the yellow is the planned route, so that's the highlighter being used to plan where you're going to drive, and then this observer used arrows, white arrows, to show where they actually drove for the surveys. And so here you can see counting out the number of sections within this township to equal 30 kilometers of surveying road. So this is one section here, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so that's 6 sections equals whatever that would be in kilometers. And you can count that out for the rest of the township. As you're driving along looking for nests, you're going to keep an eye out for where nests might be, so different structures. When you do stop to look at a stick nest more closely to see if there's an individual on the nest or nearby, then make sure to pull your car over as far over to the side of the road as possible, being mindful of road conditions, but of other traffic as well too. You want to look at any of these potential nest structures and stick nests and look for evidences of activity or nesting. And this evidence can include things like fresh whitewash, birds in the nest, or fresh nesting material. And this is sort of a common view that you might see that has a Phrygianus hawk and a large stick nest in a tree. So when you do spot a nest, don't approach it too quickly or too closely. It's best to try to keep your distance as far away as possible and try to reduce that disturbance to the bird. And I generally find that stopping anywhere from 200 to 400 meters is pretty good for your first view with binoculars or a spotting scope. And then I approach a little bit more and more as I need it, and certainly not any closer than I need it as well. If you're approaching the nest, driving up to the nest slowly, and the bird seems concerned whether they stand up or get a little bit shifty, then don't approach any closer and do your best to observe and identify the bird from that distance. Be very careful about not flushing birds from nests, because at this point in the year they are laying or incubating eggs, and it's a very sensitive nesting stage for them. Don't be tempted to trespass in order to identify a bird, because we do take unknown bird species and incorporate that into the data as well too. And as we've also learned to try not to park in front of houses while you're using a scope or binoculars when you're trying to ID a bird. Try to keep a distance. So we're going to go through just an example survey to kind of walk everybody through it. So as you're gearing up, you're at home, you've checked in, you've packed your gear, you've got things like spotting scope, field guides, your map, and so forth. You've also planned your route ahead of time on the paper map using a highlighter, so you've planned out your 30 kilometers. And so now you're ready to start out to the starting point of your block, which is something that we've provided. So once you've geared up, you've looked at your route, then you can start driving slowly, 20 to 50 kilometers along this predetermined route. and just keep scanning their horizon side by side, and make sure that you're not actually distracted driving, because it doesn't take a lot to just sort of scan to the side looking for stick nests. And make sure you're not fiddling with things like your GPS or your maps or anything like that, because it's just not necessary. As you're surveying, let's say you spot a nest. So then you pull over safely and stop with the nest in view. You take your binoculars or your spotting scope to take a closer look at the bird. Sometimes identifying a bird can be really quick and easy because you've got a great view, and it can take 30 seconds. But sometimes we've had to take as long as 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or even 45 minutes to identify a bird because the conditions are just really tough. Sometimes birds are hunkered really low down in the nest because it's windy or cold, or they're feeling a little bit stressed out by your presence, so they get really low and it's hard to see them. And so sometimes you just have to wait for the bird out until they lift their head, or to stretch, or just get a better view as it plays out. And then sometimes, even after you spend quite a bit of time trying to identify the bird, maybe it's just too far away, then sometimes birds just can't be identified. So there is a spot in the data form to identify a nest that has a bird nesting in it, but when the species can't be identified. So just take note of it. One of the things that we've learned while surveying for Fruscian's hawks is that they will often be spending time near the nest. And so if you're having trouble identifying a bird that's incubating in the nest because it's too far or too low, then look around the nest as well too, because Fruscian's hawks will sit on the ground near the nest. They might be perched in nearby trees, on fence posts, and very often as well too, they can be on any hillsides or hilltops as well, keeping a close eye on things. So let's say the stick nest you found actually has a Fruscian's hawk in it. So then this is when you open and fill out the Survey 123 nest form. Once you've filled it all out, you can keep surveying your route. But let's say you then encounter an impassable road because it's too muddy and this is a route that you've planned on your map. That's just fine. So then choose a new route on your map and note the change that it's deviated. So keep surveying for at least 20 kilometers up to 30 kilometers. And then when you're all done surveying 30 kilometers within your township, fill out the CHES survey block form on Survey 123. So things to be considerate of for safety is that safety is always paramount, and so be very aware and be very cautious around other traffic. Also be very considerate of road conditions, whether it's mud, snow, or ice, and it's also important to leave a safety plan with somebody at home as well too. So leave your route at home with somebody where they know where you're going, and schedule check-ins by phone as well too, so then they know that you're okay. So then there's contact information that's been provided if you have any other further questions for the survey protocol, and I hope everybody has fun and finds a lot of Fruscian's hawks.